Wow, Lizzie, look at what Aiden made. It's going straight on the fridge. My mother's voice carried across the dining room, her enthusiasm as predictable as the Sunday pot roast. I glanced up from helping my daughter Maddie add final touches to her watercolor of the lake behind my parents' house in Greenbrook, a small town just outside of Harrisburg that most Pennsylvanians couldn't point to on a map. Sitting beside me, Maddie's shoulders slumped slightly. At 9 years old, she was already too aware of the pattern. Next to her, my 11-year-old son Tyler pretended not to notice, his pencil moving methodically across his sketch pad, each stroke precise and intentional. He had long ago mastered the art of seeming oblivious to my sister Jen's children, receiving endless praise for artwork that, being honest, resembled something you'd find crumpled at the bottom of a kindergartner's backpack. "Mom, I finished mine," Maddie whispered, her voice small but hopeful as she slid her painting toward me. The watercolor captured not just the lake, but the quality of the late afternoon light reflecting off the water, the shadows of the trees stretching across the surface. At 9, she already understood perspective and shading in ways that made my heart ache with pride. "It's beautiful, sweetie. Why don't you show Grandma?" I suggested, knowing exactly what would happen next, but hoping, always hoping, that today might be different. Maddie hesitated, then nodded, carefully picking up her painting and walking over to where my mother stood, admiring a lopsided stick figure with an oversized head that my 6-year-old nephew Aiden had scribbled in bold crayon. My sister Jen beamed beside them, her hand resting on Aiden's shoulder as if he just presented a masterpiece to the Museum of Modern Art. "Grandma, I finished my painting," Maddie said, holding up her work. My mother glanced over, barely taking her eyes off Aiden's drawing. "That's nice, honey. Look at this dog Aiden drew. Isn't it clever how he made the tail so wiggly?" It wasn't a dog. It was supposedly a horse, according to the earlier announcement Aiden had made. But more importantly, my mother had just dismissed months of Maddie's dedicated practice. Her careful observation of light and shadow, her patient layering of colors, with a cursory, "That's nice." I watched my daughter's face fall for a fraction of a second before she composed herself, nodding politely and returning to her seat beside me. No one else would have noticed that fleeting moment of hurt, but I saw it like a slap. "It's really beautiful, Maddie," I whispered, squeezing her shoulder. "It doesn't matter," she replied, and the resignation in her voice made something twist inside me. Across the table, Tyler continued drawing, his focus absolute. He'd stopped showing his work to my parents or my sister's family years ago. At 11, he'd already learned what took most adults a lifetime to figure out. You can't make people see your value if they've decided not to look. "Lizzie, come help me in the kitchen," my mother called, and I rose automatically, years of conditioning making my body respond before my mind could object. In the kitchen, my mother was arranging cookie dough on a baking sheet, her movements efficient after decades of practice. "Jen was telling me Aiden got selected for the gifted art program at school," she said proudly. "They only choose 3 kids per grade. His teacher says he has a unique perspective." I bit my tongue, literally, until I tasted blood. Tyler had been rejected from the same district's program last year, despite submitting a portfolio that his art teacher had called extraordinary for his age. The rejection had confused his teacher so much that she'd called me personally to express her shock. "That's great," I managed, though I'm surprised given the standards of their selection process. My mother's hands paused over the cookie dough. "What's that supposed to mean?" I could have backed down. Should have, probably. But something about Maddie's resigned, "It doesn't matter," echoed in my head. Just that Tyler's art teacher was certain he would get in last year. She was really surprised when he didn't. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Different schools have different criteria. Besides, Tyler's so good at math. He doesn't need art like Aiden does. Aiden struggles with reading, you know. No, art is his thing." "Mom, have you actually looked at Tyler and Maddie's artwork recently? Really looked?" She turned to me, her expression hardening slightly. "Of course I have. They're very good. All the kids are talented in their own ways. But you put Aiden's stick figures on the fridge and barely glance at Maddie's paintings. Oh, Lizzie." She sighed, as if I were being particularly dense. "Not everything has to be a competition. Can't you just be happy that your nephew is getting some recognition? Do your kids really need to be the center of attention all the time? The irony was so thick I could have spread it on toast. My kids, the center of attention? They were practically invisible in this house. That's not what this is about, I started, but she cut me off. I think you need to learn how to celebrate other people's children, not just your own. Being a good aunt means supporting all the kids in the family, not just pushing your own forward. And there it was, the familiar twist, where somehow I became the villain for simply pointing out the obvious inequality. I'd been here so many times before that I could predict her next words. Family means being there for each other, Lizzie. Not everything has to be about whose kid is better at what. I nodded, conceding the battle while rage simmered beneath my calm exterior. This wasn't just about art or recognition. It was about my children learning that their hard work and talent didn't matter, that they would always come second to their cousins in the eyes of people who should love them equally. Back in the dining room, I found my sister Jen perched on the edge of the table, examining Tyler's sketchbook over his shoulder. My son's posture had gone rigid, his knuckles white around his pencil. "You're really good at copying things," she was saying, her tone suggesting this was somehow a lesser skill. "Aiden prefers to draw from imagination. His teacher says that shows real creativity." I watched my son nod politely, his face carefully blank. Maddie sat beside him, protectively close, her own rejection still fresh. "Thanks," Tyler said quietly, closing his sketchbook as soon as Jen moved away. Under the table, I saw him slip it into his backpack, where it would remain hidden for the rest of the visit. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with the same predictable pattern. My nephews, Aiden and 5-year-old Connor, received effusive praise for everything from the way they ate their dinner to how they stacked blocks in the living room afterward. My children moved through the house like shadows, polite and quiet, doing everything right, but somehow always invisible. On the drive home, Tyler stared out the window, the city of Greenbrook sliding past in the gathering dusk. "Can we skip next Sunday?" he asked suddenly. "Why would you want to skip seeing your grandparents?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Because we don't matter there," Maddie said from the back seat, her voice small but certain. "We're just extra." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles going white. "You matter to me. Always. More than anything." "We know, Mom," Tyler said, "but can we skip it anyway?" I nodded slowly. "I'll tell Grandma we have other plans next weekend." And so it began. One missed Sunday turned into 2, then 3. My mother called, her voice sharp with accusation. "You're pulling away from the family, Lizzie. The boys keep asking where Tyler and Maddie are. It's not fair to them." I almost laughed at the mention of fairness. "We've been busy. The kids have their own activities. Family comes first," she insisted. "You're teaching your children to isolate themselves. That's not healthy." "We're not isolating. We're just focusing on some other priorities right now." The conversation ended with my mother's thinly veiled disapproval and a reminder that family doesn't skip family. I hung up feeling both guilty and justified, a combination I was growing familiar with. The following week, Tyler came home from school vibrating with excitement, something I hadn't seen in months. "Miss Harrington wants to enter my drawings in the Keystone Youth Art Exhibition," he blurted as soon as he walked through the door. "She says I have a real chance at placing." The Keystone exhibition was a big deal, covering all of central Pennsylvania. Getting selected was an honor. Placing would be extraordinary. "Tyler, that's amazing." I pulled him into a hug, feeling his lanky frame relax against me for just a moment before the typical preteen stiffness returned. "Which pieces is she submitting?" "My architectural series, the old buildings downtown. She says my perspective work is advanced." The pride in his voice made my heart swell. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and Tyler's sketchbook open before me. He'd given me permission to look through it, something he rarely did these days. Page after page revealed detail and observation that took my breath away. The crumbling brick of the old factory by the river, the ornate windows of the courthouse, the sweeping lines of the bridge connecting our town to its neighbor across the water. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Jen just told me Aiden got honorable mention in his school art show. We're having a celebration dinner Sunday. You and the kids need to be there. Not a request, a command. I stared at the message, then back at Tyler's exquisite drawings. Something hardened inside me, a resolve that had been building for months, maybe years. We'll be there. I texted back, and we have some exciting news to share too. For the first time in forever, I was looking forward to Sunday dinner. When Sunday arrived, I dressed with unusual care, selecting a crisp blue button-down and dark jeans that made me feel armored. The kids noticed the change immediately. Are we doing something special after Grandma's? Maddie asked hopefully as she climbed into the car. No, I replied, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. But today is going to be different. I promise. Tyler glanced at me skeptically from the passenger seat. Different how? You'll see. I pulled into my parents' driveway 30 minutes later, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of anxiety and determination. Under my arm, I carried a portfolio case containing selections of both Tyler and Maddie's recent work, professionally mounted and presented as if for a gallery showing. Inside, the house was decorated with balloons and a banner reading, "Congratulations, Aiden!" My nephew sat at the head of the table wearing a paper crown, looking pleased with himself. "You're late," my mother said by way of greeting. "Traffic," I lied smoothly. "Congratulations, Aiden. What's the celebration for?" Aiden got honorable mention in the school art show, Jen announced proudly. Out of all the first grades. The principal personally told me his work stood out. "That's wonderful," I said, setting my portfolio case against the wall. "Congrats, buddy." My father emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of grilled chicken. "The artist of the hour," he declared, ruffling Aiden's hair as he passed. "Maybe we've got the next Picasso in the family." I waited patiently through the beginning of dinner, listening to the extended retelling of Aiden's achievement, how the art teacher had been blown away by his crayon drawing of what was either a fire truck or a dragon. The family seemed divided on the interpretation. How the principal had personally come to view it, how they'd given him a special certificate with a gold star. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, I cleared my throat. Actually, we have some exciting news too. Tyler's art teacher has selected his work for submission to the Keystone Youth Art Exhibition. The table went quiet. My mother recovered first. Well, that's nice. The school show is always fun. It's not a school show, Mom. It's a juried exhibition covering all of Central Pennsylvania. Only a handful of students get selected to even submit work. Jen frowned slightly. How old are the other kids? Maybe it's for the younger grades where there's less competition. The dismissal was so blatant that I saw Tyler flinch beside me. Actually, I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling up, it's extremely competitive. That's why Miss Harrington is only submitting work from 2 students in the entire school. My father nodded absently. That's nice. Hey, did we tell you Aiden's picture is going to be displayed in the school office all year? I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me for a moment. I retrieved the portfolio case, unzipping it with deliberate motions as I returned to the table. I brought some of the kids' recent work to show you, since you've been asking about what they've been up to. Lizzie, we're in the middle of dinner, my mother protested. This will just take a minute. I pulled out Maddie's watercolors first, 3 landscapes that showed her progression over the past few months. Maddie's been studying watercolor techniques with Mrs. Wilson at the community center. I laid them on the table, away from the food but clearly visible. Then came Tyler's architectural drawings, detailed, precise, with a grasp of perspective that made buildings seem to rise from the page. And these are what Tyler's submitting to the exhibition. An uncomfortable silence fell. My family stared at the artwork, unable to dismiss it now that it was literally on the table before them. Well, my father said finally, these are certainly detailed. They're exceptional, I corrected him. Tyler's art teacher says he has technical skills most high school students haven't mastered, and Maddie's understanding of color and light is years beyond her age group. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Lizzie, no one's saying they're not good. Actually, Mom, you've never said they're good. You've never really said anything about their art. You put Aiden's stick figures on the fridge and act like he's Michelangelo, but you can't spare 5 seconds to actually look at what your other grandchildren are creating. The table went deadly silent. Jen's face flushed red. Are you seriously trying to compete with a 6-year-old? At his own celebration dinner? I'm not competing with anyone, I said calmly. I'm asking why some grandchildren in this family are celebrated and others are ignored. That's ridiculous, my mother snapped. We love all the children equally. Do you? When was the last time you put one of Tyler or Maddie's artworks on display? When was the last time you called me specifically to tell me how proud you were of something they did? When was the last time you threw a dinner with balloons and a banner for one of their achievements? My father looked uncomfortable. Lizzie, you're being dramatic. No, Dad. I'm finally saying what needs to be said. My children have been made to feel invisible in this family for years. They've learned to hide their talents because every time they show them, someone in this room makes sure to knock them down or ignore them completely. That's not fair, Jen protested. Just because we're celebrating Aiden today. It's not about today, I interrupted. It's about every Sunday for years. It's about Tyler stopping showing his drawings to any of you because you'd glance at them for 2 seconds before going back to praising whatever scribble Aiden or Connor had produced. It's about Maddie asking me last month if her art was actually bad because her grandparents never seemed to care about it. My mother's face had gone pale. We never said their art was bad. You didn't have to say it. Your actions made it perfectly clear. I looked around the table, at the shocked faces of my family, at Tyler and Maddie, sitting straight-backed and tense beside me, at my nephews watching with wide eyes. We're leaving, I said quietly. And we won't be back until there's a genuine change in how all the children in this family are treated. They all deserve to be seen, appreciated, and celebrated, not just some of them. I gathered the artwork carefully, sliding it back into the portfolio. Kids, go get your jackets. Lizzie, you're overreacting, my mother said, her voice shaking slightly. Sit down and let's discuss this calmly. We've been calm for years, I replied. All that's gotten us is hurt children who think their talents don't matter to their own family. As we walked to the door, my father followed us. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. You're dividing the family over nothing. I turned to face him, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. It's not nothing to them, Dad. And it shouldn't be nothing to you either. When you're ready to be grandparents to all your grandchildren, not just the ones who happen to be in your line of sight, let me know. The drive home was silent for several minutes before Tyler spoke. You didn't have to do that, Mom. Yes, I did, I replied softly. Because you matter. Are we never going to see Grandma and Grandpa again? Maddie asked, her voice small. We will, I assured her. But things are going to be different now. 3 weeks passed without contact from my family, though I knew from experience that the family gossip network would be buzzing. I focused on the kids, on helping Tyler prepare his submissions for the exhibition, on enrolling Maddie in the advanced watercolor class she'd been eyeing. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang with my mother's number. Hello? I answered, bracing myself. Lizzie, my mother said, her voice unusually subdued. I wonder if you and the kids might come for dinner this Sunday. Just the 5 of us. No Jen's family this time. I hesitated. Mom, I meant what I said. Things need to change. I know, she replied, and something in her tone made me pause. That's why I'm calling. Your father and I have been doing some thinking. Sunday arrived clear and cool, an early spring breeze rustling the newly budded trees as we pulled into my parents' driveway. I'd prepared the kids for the possibility that nothing had changed, that this was just a ploy to get us back into the fold without addressing the real issues. If it goes badly, we leave, I promised them. No arguments, no guilt. We just walk out. My mother opened the door before we could knock, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination I'd never seen before. Come in, she said, stepping back. Your father's just finishing up in the living room. We followed her through the house, the kids sticking close to me like ducklings. When we reached the living room, I stopped in surprise. The walls, previously covered with family photos heavily featuring my sister's children, had been rearranged. In the center of the main wall hung 2 framed pieces, one of Tyler's architectural drawings and one of Maddie's watercolors. Around them were photos of all 4 grandchildren, arranged with equal prominence. My father stood on a stepladder, adjusting the new arrangement. "What do you think?" he asked, turning to look at us. "Your mother picked out the frames yesterday." Tyler and Maddie stared in shock at their artwork, professionally matted and framed, hanging in the place of honor in their grandparents' home. "When did you get these?" I asked, stunned. "I asked their teachers," my mother admitted. "I went to the school and the community center last week. Their instructors were very informative." There was a note in her voice I couldn't quite place, embarrassment perhaps, or regret. "Miss Harrington showed me Tyler's portfolio," she continued. "And Mrs. Wilson had quite a lot to say about Maddie's progress with watercolors. They both spoke very highly of the children's abilities." My father descended from the ladder, setting it aside. "We owe you an apology," he said, looking not at me but at Tyler and Maddie. "All of you, but especially you two. We haven't been very good at seeing what was right in front of us." The kids looked to me, uncertain how to respond. I nodded encouragingly. "I like the frames," Maddie offered shyly. "Me too," Tyler added, his voice carefully neutral, still protecting himself from potential disappointment. My mother gestured to the dining room. "Dinner's almost ready, but there's something else we wanted to show you first." In the dining room, the table was set as usual, but at each of the kids' places was an envelope. My mother nodded for them to open them. Inside were tickets to the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. "We thought we could all go together next month," my father explained. "Make a weekend of it. There's a special exhibition on American landscape painters that Mrs. Wilson thought Maddie would particularly enjoy, and the architecture of the building itself is something Tyler might appreciate." I watched my children's faces as they realized what was happening, that their grandparents had not only acknowledged their talents, but had taken concrete steps to show they valued them. "That would be cool," Tyler said, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Really cool," Maddie agreed, more enthusiastic. As we sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed differently than it ever had before. My parents asked Tyler specific questions about his architectural drawings, what had inspired him, how he achieved certain effects. They listened to Maddie explain the watercolor techniques she was learning, nodding with genuine interest. Later, as my father and the kids cleared the table, my mother pulled me aside. "I called Jen yesterday," she said quietly. "Told her things were going to be different from now on, that all the grandchildren would be getting equal attention and recognition." "How did she take it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "About as well as you'd expect. She accused me of playing favorites, now in your favor instead of hers." My mother shook her head. "She doesn't see it yet, but she will, or she'll have to adjust." "And you're okay with that? With the possibility that she might react the way I did?" My mother was silent for a long moment. "I'm not okay with losing any of my family," she said finally, "but I'm even less okay with continuing to hurt children who deserve better from us. Your children deserved better. You were right about that." It wasn't a perfect resolution. There would still be Sunday dinners where I'd have to bite my tongue, still moments of old patterns reasserting themselves. Jen would take time to adjust, if she ever did. But standing in my parents' dining room, watching my children laugh with their grandparents in a way they hadn't in years, I knew we'd crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. 2 months later, I stood in the gallery of the Keystone Youth Art Exhibition, surrounded by proud parents and nervous young artists. Tyler fidgeted beside me, trying not to stare at his drawing hanging on the wall, one of his Greenbrook architectural studies, the old courthouse with its ornate facade captured in such detail that you could almost feel the texture of the weathered stone. "They're announcing the winner soon?" he whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. I squeezed his shoulder. "No matter what happens, I'm so proud of you." "We all are," my father added, standing on Tyler's other side. My mother nodded in agreement, her hand resting lightly on Maddie's shoulder. When Tyler's name was called for second place, the look of shock on his face was quickly replaced by a grin so wide it threatened to split his face in two. As he walked up to accept his certificate and ribbon, I glanced at my parents. My mother was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and my father stood tall, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Later that evening, as we celebrated at Tyler's favorite restaurant, I watched my son describe his techniques to my father, who listened with rapt attention. Across the table, my mother was helping Maddie sketch something on a napkin, their heads bent close together. The invisible children had finally been seen, and that was all they had ever wanted.